Well, you don't remember everything, which you imagine you will. You imagine that the pleasure of it will be spoiled by remembering, oh, I didn't do that, all those kind of things. But I didn't feel like that. I felt very strongly a number of things. I felt that it was clear that we'd set out to make as pleasurable a film as possible out of subject matter that actually is almost unwatchable. So that dichotomy between that paradox right there was really important to the making of the film. And and that made me remember that was one of the philosophies that we set out to do. And that's very much in Irving's book. The book is hugely entertaining, despite the fact that it's graphically almost impossible to read sometimes, what's going on in it. So we wanted to try and capture that somehow in the film. The second thing was just the actors, really. And because you've got to always remember that 99% of people go to watch movies because of actors. It doesn't matter what anybody says at these screenings or whatever critics say or everything like that. Really what drives audiences and what drives the life of cinema is actually people's relationships with the actors. And those 4 or 5, they were all good, the actors, but the 4 or 5 lead actors were just incredible. And I was like, obviously I remembered them thinking they were like that, but it was amazing to get a refresher of just how good they were and how extreme they took it, and how the centre was McGregor, was Ewan, actually just holding the centre and guiding you through it. And it'd be almost impossible to assimilate what's going on because it's so bold, the choices that are made. You have to have somebody trying to make that sense of that for you, and that's him. He's the narrator guiding you through it all, really. As well as also managing somehow, despite that role, which can be a bit boring sometimes, he's actually also presenting you with this very, very modern character who is gradually finding himself, he's going to have to lose his background. It's a very, very modern British character, which is lose his background. If he's going to progress, he's got to lose it and move on. I think we were very confident because the book filled us with confidence. I mean, I suppose you could break 2 ways. I mean, you could think, oh my God, this is so good. How are we ever going to get near that? But John inspired us in the adaptation because he made a decision, clearly, that we couldn't do a conventional job on the book because there isn't a conventional job to be done. It isn't really a conventional story. It's a series of vignettes set over written over many, many years, really, with the same kind of characters looping in and out of them, really. And so he took that philosophy to the adaptation, which is that just be inspired by these characters, this vernacular, these people, and a few of these circumstances. And that filled us with confidence going into it, because I remember thinking, I read he delivered initially about 18, 20 pages of it. I remember reading that on the tube on the way home, him having given it me, and I was laughing out loud. And it was outrageous. It was accurate, and yet I was laughing. And that's my reaction to the book. I remember roaring, laughing at the book. And yet it's deadly accurate as well. It's clearly experienced and acute, about something appalling. So, yeah, it was. I think our confidence came from John's screenplay, really. Also, we'd had a hit, Shallow Grave. That helps you, feel the kind of that ego that kind of thrusts you forward. You haven't failed yet, so you don't have that inhibitor on you. So that helped, I think, in the confidence thing, because I think a lot of people, there were voices on the sidelines saying this is crazy. You'll never be able to. Make this one, sure, but then you'll make a proper film after this because, nobody will go, drug films don't work, what you're trying to depict, the accents, it's going to be impossible for people to access it other than a small coterie of people, But actually, we always felt that the book spoke to everyone, really, and represented a generation very, very strongly. It's very, very much a generational book. Yeah, I suppose it's very difficult to actually. Things are born out of when you make them. Really, you can't really go. Oh, if you could take that material now, how would you make it now? You can't really do that. You can't really ask that question. It's not fair to ask it. Obviously, I suppose if you were making the story now, you would probably take a different approach with the cameras that are available. I mean, we shot it in a very classical way. It's shot on film, but actually through the brilliance of the cinematographer and the designer, we were able to make it feel immediate, you know, in the way that you imagine smaller cameras and new technology allows you to do more easily. You could do it with film. You just had to make sure that you had the right people who allowed you to do that, and the equipment didn't get in the way of the story, which it shouldn't do. It should actually lead you to the story, which is that's a tribute to Brian Tufano and Cave Quinn, you know, the cinematographer and the designer, that they allowed us to do that. Yeah, you do. You kind of think, oh God, I should go to the school more and kind of teach a bit. Anything there is to teach. I'm not sure there is stuff to teach in a certain way, other than it's a wonderful place to find out about yourself, which any student has. I believe it's a kind of right in a modern society for people to be students for a while, just to find out about themselves, really. Through study of a certain skills, you know, whatever it is at the London Film School, you know, in terms of media. But also, and just as importantly, is to find out how you act, how you interact with your peer group, because it should be your peer group that you make the films with, not with old fogies like me supposedly telling you how to do it. It's actually more important that you head out with your own peer group and make something yourself. And you want to inspire people to do that. You want to give people the confidence to do that. And certainly Trainspotting is an example of that, because Trainspotting is the kind of film that has the kind of brio, kind of daft brio that comes out of something like film school, where you go, no, it's that arrogance of, no, we think it should be done like this. You know, and you want to encourage people to go, yeah, exactly. That's what cinema's about. It's about you having your own voice, and you'll need support in that voice, and that's your peer group will give you that. And your voice will become stronger as a combination, you know, negotiating how you make all your voices become one voice. But actually that will allow you to make something to contribute to cinema, really, rather than make shadow copies of stuff that's worked in the past and now people turn up to teach about or whatever. I mean, obviously, one of the things that happened was happening anyway in the time, and obviously I think Trainspotting contributed to it, is that the barriers came down between all these different disciplines, if you like, because it used to be, you know, that it was clear this was an advert and this was a proper film, and then suddenly they began to mingle a bit. I mean, it started before us with people like Ridley Scott, and you know, there were techniques that were used in classical advertising that were used in classical films as well, and they were beginning to breed together, to intermingle, and there's certainly more and more crossover. Those barriers came down much more. You certainly feel it. Music's such an important part of Trainspotting. You certainly feel it with music, which is feeds everywhere. People get access to music now through adverts, through jingles, through ringtones, through all sorts of access points, really. And they accumulate, you know, and the way people pick up the baggage of culture has become much more, I don't know whether democratic's the right way, but it's much more free form in the way you pick up that baggage now. I'm not sure that the figures would support that. I think the golden age of cinema is the attendances were extraordinary. You know, everybody used to attend, and there were cinemas everywhere. People now access it through different forms, really, rather than through necessarily a special trip to the cinema. Whether it's more accessible, if you mean, is it more possible for people to make the films? In theory, it should be. In theory, it should have been the great leveller. Digital equipment, the cheapness of it, means that, you know, anybody could. The truth is, I think, certainly my experience looking at it, is that why hasn't there been a burst of great comedians like Woody Allen? Woody Allen's films don't cost a lot of money to make. The introduction of digital equipment should have meant that the 100,000 other Woody Allens out there who never got to make their film will now be able to make their film. It doesn't work like that, of course, because actually there's only so many Woody Allens out there. There aren't that many of them, really. I think there's only so many stories, actually. But hopefully the people that can tell them, there's a bit more democracy about people being able to enter the playing field and tell their stories, really. But I'm not sure you'll get that glut of endless stories like I certainly thought there would be once digital equipment was introduced. Yes, I think so, because I think they're driven not by the equipment, you know, they're actually driven by the need to tell the story, by finding the story in people that you see in the street, circumstances that happen in your life which morph into some kind of story, an ambition to tell a story that's like another story but pulls in another element of another story. All those things somehow coalesce, and then they look, how can we make this? You know, and then it's a choice, you know, well, there's no choice now, you will make it on digital equipment, but you can make it like Harry Potter digital equipment, or you can make it like very, very cheap documentary digital equipment, really. But the essence is the story. And just to go back to the school, finding that story, that's part of being a student at the London Film School as well, is having that time to think, what do I want to do? You can learn the techniques, you can study the masters, all that kind of stuff, but actually you go, what do I want to do with it? What do I want to say with these skills that these people are going to help me acquire, you know? And having the time to go to think about it. You may not find it in the school itself, but it'll lay the seed for when you do find it in years to come. You would imagine that it would become much more, people would become much more comfortable around cameras because there's so many of them now, they're so much part of our life, and you would imagine that would make people feel much freer about using them. Can't quite see that evidence as yet. You know, I always used to say, like, I always used to think that Americans were better screen actors because there was a culture there where cameras were much more part of your life. Kids were bought Super 8 cameras as, you know, it was something that was much more part of their lives. I'm not sure that it has changed it that much, really. Maybe it takes much longer to do it. You would imagine, you would hope that it would mean that the tool of a camera, however it manifests itself, whether in a tiny little digital camera in your phone or in one of these or a huge 3D IMAX camera, people would feel confident about using them in a visual literary medium world, which is what we're now in, where so many stories are accessed not through writing but through just visual, the actual visual pictures of it. I don't know whether you would imagine that's true. I don't know whether it is true. I've yet to see the evidence of it. I don't think there's any discernible difference yet in the way that pictures are made. You still look to the innovators. You know, Lynch is still an innovator, and yet you go, my God, hang on a minute, he was making films in the late 70s. You know, and yet, you know, if you're talking about who are the great innovators, who's like, you go, whoa, David Lynch, you know, someone who shocks you with his storytelling. So maybe it's actually not so much to do with our daily interaction with absorbing material, but it's to do with the occasional storyteller comes along, born of unique circumstances, who truly does pin us back in our seats, you know.